World War II was a global conflict that, by its end, had involved or affected 104 countries. This conflict disrupted any order the world had known. It tested our society, our alliances, our ability to persevere, our ability to build and to rebuild, and our ability to sympathize with those in need. Lasting between 1939 and 1945, the Axis and Allied armies fought gallantly for their ideals, the anti-Nazi campaign coming out victorious in the end. But not before 60 million lives were lost. The battles fought during the Second Great War were known for their brutality and high death tolls. But the understanding of these horrific events that occurred during these battles cannot truly be understood by the words of a book, which lacks the emotion, the fears, the anger, the joys. That is why we go straight to a primary source, to hear the stories of men like Fred Ohr, an ace pilot during the Second World War, so that generations to come can learn from them. Fred Ohr, son of Korean immigrants Wanda and Won Yu, was born July 15th of 1919. Ohr's father and grandfather were part of the ruling class of Korea before Japan invaded and began to overtake them. Immediately during the takeover, Japan began to remove any members of the ruling class or anyone with money, status, governmental power, or education. Because of his social status, Ohr's father was wanted for execution. Wanting to protect himself and his family, Won Yu brought his family overseas to America, raising his son in Boise, Idaho.
Well, I was on a farm. Worked on the farm because that's all we had. We didn't have enough to, buy equipment and so forth to have a large area. So we had what we call a truck farming, where you have vegetables and corn and maybe some potatoes and things like that. And if it wasn't for that, I think we would have starved, because in 28 and 29, the 30s, the Depression was something that, you think we were having it hard now. Boy, it was really rough. And my father would dig big areas in the ground, and late fall he'd bury the potatoes and vegetables and melons and whatever we had, and he would bury them and he'd cover them up. So in Christmas time we could have a watermelon or any vegetables. We had potatoes, so we had our own table. So we survived. Otherwise, I don't think we'd have made it, because it was rough.
Fred Ohr decided very young that he wanted to become a pilot. At 6 years old, the sight of his first airplane left such an impact that he immediately knew that one day he'd be the man in the cockpit.
And it was one of these bi-wing, floppy-looking things. When you looked at the front, it looked like an old Cadillac radiator, and out right through the center of the radiator was this propeller. And it flew by, and I looked at it, and it was United States airmail. That was one of the first airmail. And when I saw that, I said, boy, this is what I want to do. And I said, I want to fly. But then I said I wanted to fly for the United States Army Air Corps. Now, that in those days, that was an impossibility. And my mother would always say that if the desire was great enough, she always said it will happen. And she was right.
Ohr knew that in order to be eligible for the Air Corps, he would have to have more than a high school diploma. As a sophomore in high school, he began his multiple unsuccessful attempts to enlist in several different branches of service, hoping to receive some college education from Uncle Sam.
So I thought, well, when I was in Boise, there was a recruiting station, where they come in and they take over a vacant storefront and they set up. And I walked in there, and this was the Army. I walked in there and the guy looked at me and third time I looked. Well, I came in this door, and that was the exit. He didn't say one word to me. So I looked, and that was the exit. So I thought, well, I better go. I better leave. So I got outside, and I said, gee whiz, I didn't do so good. Did I? Then a year or so later, they had a big thing. The Navy had a big promotion. It had a newspaper thing, big thing. It says, join the Navy and see the world and be a machinist, be a certified machinist. So I thought, well, gee whiz, maybe that'll be a good post-war job. So I went to see him, and he was nice to me. He talked to me all the way through, and as we looked, he talked to me for about a half an hour, and then finally towards the end, I kind of got the hint that he was toying with me like a cat with the mouse, and he was just waiting to get the punchline in. So I was thinking to myself, well, I'm going to see what this is. So finally he said, the Admiral is out to sea, and when he gets back in, why, we'll see what we're going to do. And I was thinking to myself, well, what's the Admiral got to do? This place, school, is underneath the San Francisco Bay Bridge on Treasure Island, I think they call it. And finally he said, I'll ask the Admiral that if he needs another cabin boy.
World War II began on September 1st, 1939, with Germany's invasion of Poland. Nearly a year later, in October of 1940, President Roosevelt signed into law the first peacetime selective service draft in the history of the United States. This required all men from the ages of 18 to 65 to register for the draft. This was the draft that Ohr worried that he would have to register for after graduation.
When I was in high school, the draft was on its way. I mean, there was just no way. I was going to be 18 when I graduated. The draft, as soon as I got out of the graduation class, I'd probably have to sign up. So I figured, well, I've got to do something, get into some kind of training of combat that I could excel in if I worked at it hard enough. So I had to get out of the draft. So I signed up for the Idaho National Guard, and you wouldn't believe it was 116th Cavalry, and we had horses. So we were all farm kids. So they put all the cavalry units out in the country because we all knew how to handle horses. So that's the way I got started, and it was a good start. It taught me a few things about the military. And sure enough, after I graduated out of high school, I went to summer camp, and then I decided, well, gee, I got to have at least 2 years of college. So maybe if I could stay in this National Guard unit long enough, to stay out of trouble long enough, maybe I can get a couple of years of college in. And sure enough, I went in 1938, and in 1940, the fall, well, we were inducted into the Federal Service. So I got my 2 years of college in.
After the cavalry was inducted into the service in the fall of 1940, Ohr was able to attend his 2 years of college. In the spring of 1942, Ohr was a communications sergeant. He was in charge of laying wires so the artillery would be able to communicate via radio. It was during this time that a radio operator he had befriended him informed him that the Air Corps Examining Board would be coming to their base. Leon told Ohr that he had put in an application with the Air Corps and he had been accepted. After being accepted into the Air Corps, he had to be tested to ensure that he would be capable of being part of that branch. Leon asked Ohr if he would accompany him as moral support, but as exam day drew closer, Ohr began to feel that his presence as an Asian American would not benefit Leon.
So I went back to him. I said, Leon, by your best interest, I think it'd be best I didn't go, because it'd be terrible if they saw me with him and say, no, we don't want you. Because in those days, the Air Corps was really particular. Man, I tell you, if you wore your hat wrong while you were out, they were really tough. So finally, I went to Leon. I thought it over for a couple of days, and oh God, that was bad. And I went to Leon. I told Leon, I said, I'll go with you. Oh, he was happy, and I felt better. So we went to the squadron commander and said, what are we going to do? And he said, go ahead, take the rest of the week off, because the following Monday was the exam. So we got busy and got our clothes all pressed and shoes shined and our buttons all polished. And we even got a civilian haircut. So finally Monday morning came, we got out there, and we got there about 15 or 20 minutes early, and they were just opening up the place. And we walked in, and he gave him his papers. He took him in, and I decided, well, I better get to the farthest place I can get and grab some material. I was sitting there reading, and they had these big wicker chairs that when you sat back in it, you have to kind of lunge to get forward. And as I was reading there, I faintly heard somebody say, Sergeant, and I thought, gee, who would be calling me? And pretty soon the voice got louder, and I didn't pay attention. Pretty soon I heard, he said, Sergeant! So I had the paper like this, and I looked up and looked down underneath, and here was a pair of most exquisite riding boots. Only a colonel could wear a boot like that. A company commander couldn't afford a boot like that. Beautiful pair. So right away I thought, well, this guy had to be at least a colonel. And so I decided, boy, I gotta get to attention. So I jumped up and tried to stand at attention at the same time. I knocked the chair over because it got hooked on my back of my leg. The end table went over, and I looked. There was two steel blue eyes looking right into mine. And he was a magnificent looking fellow, good looking fellow. Tall, he was about 6 foot. He had decorations from here all the way down to here. And he said, next. And I stood there and I said, next for what? And as he ran back in, he couldn't get back in the room fast enough before he got in. Before he got to the door, he burst out laughing because he knew he just scared the daylights out of me. So I thought, well, I better get in there before he changed his mind. So I went in there, and he said, come on, follow me. So he took me around to the front where the captain was sitting there ready to send the people in the exam. And he told the captain, he said, make out a cadet application for aviation cadet. And the captain just kind of looked at him, and the colonel shook his head. Yes, application form for aviation cadet. Boy, so he jumped up and he got it made my application form right there. And the next thing I know, I was in there taking the exam. So I got in without even registering for it. The only thing I had was a dream that someday I'd be an aviation cadet. So those words came to my mind. If the desire was great enough, it would happen.